This. The introduction of Dr. Hannibal Lecter was the moment that I got hooked on the show Hannibal. Horror is not my usual cup of tea, but whether it was the amazing cast, the stunning suits that Mads Mikkelsen wears, or the gorgeous way the show was shot, I was entranced. At least for the first half of the season before I got distracted by moving across an ocean. And I think that the sound design is a good part of the reason why. This piece, the aria from Bach's Goldberg variations, or most of it anyway, is the only actual piece of music in the entire 42 minutes of the first episode. You get the odd sound cue, crescendos before dramatic moments, and lots of atmospheric stuff while Will Graham is doing his thing at a crime scene, but the only actual melodic thing you get, other than the Goldberg, in the entire episode is when Will is rescuing Winston, his new shelter dog. Now, this isn't to say that the sound design is in any way lacking. It's really good. It just makes the introduction of the Goldberg an enormous shift when it does happen. Especially with the sound effects and the music being so sparse anyway, because you can go a couple minutes at a time only hearing the actors speaking to each other. And then to have this piece played, it really makes you sit up and take notice. And what's more, the aria is basically our introduction to Hannibal. Nobody comes out and says, "Hey, this is Hannibal Lecter." We don't even hear Hannibal's name before this moment. But with the aria, with the impeccable meal, the way he was introduced, there really wasn't any doubt in my mind, at least, who the guy was supposed to be. And that's the power of a good piece of music in the right place at the right time. Thank you so much for watching this week. No, wait, I'm kidding. This week, I wanted to talk about the piece that's most associated with everyone's favorite drama llama psychologist and cannibal. Because watching this episode is the first time I clearly remember hearing Goldberg in film or TV, although I must have heard it somewhere before because I made all of the right associations, and isn't it crazy how that works? It turns out that the Goldberg variations, either just the aria or one of the variations, are used in film all the time. Hannibal is just the most famous example. The English Patient, Knights in Rodanthe, Slaughterhouse-Five, Before Sunrise, True Detective, they've all got Goldberg in them somewhere, and those are far from the only examples. The Goldberg variations have become one of those pieces that everyone steeped in Western cinema somehow knows, even if they don't know they know. Let's get this part out of the way. Johann Gottlieb Goldberg was a harpsichordist and a composer in the employ of Count Hermann Karl von Kaiserling, and the story goes that the Count von Kaiserling couldn't sleep. The insomniac apparently asked J.S. Bach to write him a piece that Goldberg could play so that the Count could finally go to sleep. I'm not sure whether this is a compliment or not, because you're basically saying, Bach, write me a piece that I can fall asleep to, and Goldberg, play it so boringly that I can actually go to sleep. Although the story is no longer thought to be correct anyway, it was spread by Bach's rather enthusiastic first biography, Johann Nicholas Forkel, Goldberg was a harpsichordist at the time that Bach wrote the variations, and he was supposed to be a good one as well, so it is entirely possible that Goldberg did play the Goldberg variations for the Count von Kaiserling. I'm going to continue calling the piece the Goldbergs because they are referred to as the Goldberg variations after all, and the full published name, Klavierübung bestehend in einer Aria mit verschiedenen Veränderungen, fürs Klaviercembalo mit zwei Manualen, or in English, piano exercise consisting of one aria with different variations for clavicembalo with two manuals, is way too unwieldy. The piece itself is an aria, the theme, played at the beginning, 30 variations on the theme, and then the aria played again at the end once you've completely forgotten how it goes amidst all the varying. I think it's worth mentioning that Bach wrote 30 variations, not 5, not 10 like a normal person. Bach, being the guy that, were he alive today, would not only do the cryptic crossword every day in pen, but would also be writing to Will Shortz at the New York Times and coming up with puzzles himself, wrote 30 variations. Sure, he gave himself a structure in that every third variation is a canon, but I'm not even sure that makes it easier. Sometimes I think Bach made things so complicated just to prove that he could write things that not only followed these insane rules, but also sounded like beautiful pieces of music in their own right. Show off. Bach wrote the Goldbergs for the harpsichord, one with 2 manuals, 2 sets of keys stacked on top of each other, because pianos as we know them today didn't exist yet, and the pianos of Bach's day were rare. The aria, the theme from which Bach then varies, looks deceptively simple, and Bach takes the bass line of this theme and varies over the top of it. Think of it like a jazz player doing improvisations over a set of chords and then writing down what they've just done. It's more right than it isn't. Some of the variations have 2 voices, some have 3, and some have 4, but as I said, every 3rd variation is a canon. Not a canon like a weapon, but a canon like Pachelbel's canon, where you get voices coming in one after the other playing exactly the same music. Except Bach makes it harder for himself because of course he does. The first canon is a canon at the unison. It's exactly the same music that you just play again a bar later. You can literally copy and paste it apart from the final beat or so to make everything work. The next canon, variation 6, is a canon at the 2nd, which means that the pasted version is a whole step up from the initial bit. The 3rd canon, variation 9, is a canon at the 3rd, and so on and so forth, all the way up to a canon at the 9th. The guy was an overachiever, and this is coming from a violinist. And there's even more showing off to be done. Variation 10 is a little fugue. 3 variations are in minor, 15, 21, and 25. 25 is also called the Black Pearl.
Why is the rum always gone?
And variation 30 is a quadlibet. The first time I came across the term quadlibet in music history, I assumed someone was pulling my leg or that it was a typo. Neither of those were true. Quadlibet is the Baroque version of a mashup, for lack of a better explanation, and variation 30 contains multiple folk songs, a few of which we can name, and the names are fantastic. Ich bin so lang nicht bei dir gewesen, rückkehr, rückkehr. I have so long been away from you, come closer, and Kraut und Rüben haben mich vertrieben, hätten mein Mutter Fleisch gekocht, wär ich länger blieben. Cabbage and turnips have driven me away. Had my mother cooked meat, I'd have opted to stay. According to Forkel, Bach's first biographer, the Bach family would frequently make up quadlibets at the dinner table, as you do. I swear the Bachs must have been a family of Jacob Colliers. You can, and people have, written entire books on Goldberg, the variations, and analyzed them endlessly. But how do we get from Bach to Goldberg being one of those pieces that everyone knows? Interest in recording the Goldberg variations came about between the World Wars, but the first major recording was by Wanda Landowska in 1946. She was a pianist turned harpsichordist at the forefront of what's called the historical practice movement. It's this idea that you'd play Bach differently than you'd play Beethoven, differently than you'd play Brahms, differently than you'd play John Adams. The idea that the time period a piece was written in and the way people played music during that time informs your performance of that piece. In fact, she's supposed to have told Pablo Casals, a famous cellist at the time and still one of the cellists today, that you continue to play Bach your way and I his way, which is such a power move. Landowska's 1946 Goldberg recording sent the piece and her into the public consciousness, and Rosalind Turek, another celebrated historical practice pianist, recorded the Goldbergs on LP for the first time in 1947. I'm including both of these recordings and the other ones that I mentioned in a Spotify playlist you can find in the doobly-doo. They're both well worth checking out if you've got a minute. The name that I've been avoiding, the one that brought Goldberg and Bach's piano works into the public like no one else, is that of Glenn Gould. Again, people have written endless books about Glenn Gould and I'm really not qualified to biographize at all. So I'm just going to put links to the sources that I've referenced in the doobly-doo. Cliff Notes version, Gould was a pianist in the 20th century, a Canadian one, who spent at least half of his career obsessed with radio and recordings. He's known for humming during those recordings, for being a bit of a hypochondriac, and giving a public performance, among other things, like being a fantastic pianist. Most germane to our story, however, is that the first thing he recorded and the last thing he recorded were the same, the Goldbergs. A very young Glenn Gould recorded the Goldbergs at a very speedy clip in 1955, omitting repeats, which meant that it could be sold on a single one of Columbia's new long-playing LPs. And at the end of Glenn Gould's career in 1981, he recorded them again, this time much slower, with the humming that had become a bit of a signature. The second recording was released within a year of Gould's untimely demise due to a stroke. And as with Hannibal, you can't really talk about Goldberg without talking about Glenn Gould. And ever since Gould and Landowska and Turek, people have been recording the Goldberg variations. Pianists and harpsichordists, arrangements for guitar or harp or string orchestra. Everyone for the past 70 plus years has wanted to record Goldberg. Earlier this year of our existence, 2021, the pianist Lang Lang released his version of the Goldbergs for Deutsche Grammophon, and he's only the latest in a list of great performers to do so. But this still doesn't get us to Hannibal now, does it? The first time the Goldberg variations appeared on film was in Ingmar Bergman's The Silence in 1963. There's a sequence in which the characters listen to a radio broadcast of Variation 25, which is the Ralph Kirkpatrick recording thereof. Between his own 2 recordings of Goldberg, while he was off performing and recording other works, Gould also helped work on films. This is the era of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which came out in 1968 with its soundtrack full of music by both Strauss's, Khachaturian, and Ligeti. Gould's interaction with film and its scoring began in the 1970s, with Gould notably working on Slaughterhouse-Five, which was a score full of Bach, including the Goldberg variations 18 and 25.
Why is the rum always gone?
The Terminal Man, a 1972 movie based on Michael Crichton's book of the same name, is about a man who gets an ill-advised brain surgery.
Harry Benson is a brilliant computer scientist. For 3 minutes a day, he is violently homicidal.
And it features Gould's 1955 recording of Variation 25.
Why is the rum always gone?
Throughout, and also a very long clip of it at a climactic scene at the end of the movie where the main character kills his girlfriend during a mental breakdown. Cheerful stuff. Funnily enough, the year that Gould recorded the Goldbergs for the second time, Thomas Harris published his novel Red Dragon, in which Hannibal Lecter appears for the first time. Harris explicitly makes Hannibal a Bach lover, a point in his favor in my opinion despite all the cannibalism, and references the Goldberg variations by name as well. You could opine at length about villains and their love of classical music in general and Bach in particular. I prefer to think of them as just having good taste. And Hannibal's good taste, pun intended, continues into the films as well. In Hannibal Rising, we hear Hannibal playing the 1955 Gould, and in Hannibal, the movie, we hear the 1981 Gould version, cementing the link forever between Glenn Gould's Goldbergs and the esteemed Dr. Lecter. And while we all associate the Goldberg variations with Hannibal, especially that opening aria, it's not the only time the Goldberg variations have appeared in film or TV. Glenn Gould's IMDb alone contains 19 credits for the various parts of the Goldberg variations, and he's by far from the only person to record Goldberg. Be it sci-fi or serial killer, history or romance, the Goldbergs have been in them all. So the next time you're watching a movie and you hear that first chord, you'll go, "Oh, it's that piece!" And that's the whole point of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, give it a like. If you disliked it, give it a dislike. And if you want more of this kind of thing, why not subscribe? As I said, there is a Spotify playlist in the doobly-doo with all of the Goldberg recordings I've mentioned thus far, and some that I haven't, including my own personal favorite recording of them, which is done by Igor Levit. All of the sources I looked at are also in the footnotes in a Google Doc, if you want to have a look at any of those. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. And now the entire thing again. At the end. Duh, 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 duh. Slowing with much slowing. Signature for him. Why can't I say this? Gold, gold, gold. Goldberg, 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 Goldberg. That's his name forevermore. Glenn Goldberg.
Why is the rum always gone?